So I'm with Karl from Draft.dev. So it's going to be an interesting interview where we learn about how he started his technical marketing content agency, what went wrong last year and how he overcame some of the things, and also how he built his first business. So Karl, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Robin. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so before we start into the journey of Draft.dev, can you tell me a little bit more about what made you start this business and what were some of the first steps that you took?
Yeah, honestly, what happened was I was a software engineer and then CTO at an early stage startup. I was at a couple. And then the most recent one I was at back during the very beginning of the pandemic, we were in a bad spot for fundraising. And so we were running out of cash, and simultaneously the pandemic had thrown everything up in the air. So the company started to kind of slow down, and they put the engineers onto all of us onto half time so they could save money and sort of look for a way to sell the company. So I had to find something to do, honestly. The short answer was like either start a business or go look for another job. And the world was so uncertain in 2020 there that I was just like, well, let's go ahead and, start a business. My wife was in healthcare and had, pretty consistent, like we were sure she was going to have a job. So it seemed like in a lot of ways the right time to do it. And so I had always written on the side. I'm a, software engineer, but I like writing, and that's kind of an unusual skill set. So companies would often approach me and ask me, hey, would you write a blog post about this thing or about our tool or whatever? And I thought that was a fun thing to do. So I figured I'd just do that on the side for a while. And then eventually maybe I'll get a good job as, writing for a company, or maybe I'll go get another engineering job. Anyway, Draft.dev just grew so quickly and the demand was so big at that point. A lot of it was because these companies that market to software developers, they had all been going to conferences and spending a lot of money on events and things like that. And that all just shut down during the pandemic. So they had to put their budget somewhere, and that's where writing really took off. And so I know a lot of us that entered the tech writing space at around that time really blew up, and Draft.dev definitely did. I mean, the first 6 months we ran through, there wasn't a ton of revenue. It was just like kind of paying my bills. Then the next year, the first full year that I operated, we did $1 million in revenue, and then $2.5 million the next year. So just very fast trajectory of growth fueled by the market. And then our positioning in the market was really good. And so, we could talk about all that if you want to get into that. But to answer your question then about first customer, honestly, it was just network driven. And I tell entrepreneurs this a lot, like the groundwork that you lay when you have a full-time job and you can just go meet people and, really build out like connections can be really, really valuable when you actually go start your own thing. And that's what happened to me. I had met a lot of people in developer relations when I was speaking at conferences as an engineer in the previous years. And so I just happened to know a lot of these people that would have been good target customers. So as I started to write, I started to reach out to them, and then I started to operationalize and sort of build it into a real business. So that's kind of the very short story about Draft.dev taking off.
Yeah, and when you started it, it was a little bit almost accidental, right? You didn't think that technical content writing could be that big.
No,
you just started writing yourself, and then
I did not think this was like,
and then you were like
a real business, right? Yeah, I was just like, well, people are asking me to write, so I'll do this for a side thing for a bit, and then figure out what job I want to get next. I did not think I was ready to start a company or to like be a full-time entrepreneur. I don't think I was even confident enough at that time to think that it was possible for me. But the market just sucked me in. There was just, again, so much demand. I was in the right place, the right time. And I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, obviously, and that story, like that happens a lot more than people think. I think the perception is when you look at me now, you're like, oh, well, this guy must have just had this great design for what he was going to do. Like, no, I wish I did. I wish it was that fortuitous.
I think you didn't update the design of the website much over the years.
No.
You really just had really good product market fit on day one.
Yeah.
And we just took off from.
I worked at venture-funded startups, and I would see so many of them spend all this money on branding and design and marketing and have just no product market fit. And I think you just have to find that product market fit. It's not about the perfect landing page copy or whatever, not in the early days at least. Eventually you want to optimize that. But so I didn't waste time on things that weren't necessary. And I still try to keep that mindset to this day.
Yeah, I like that. So once you hit that product market fit, you saw all of that demand coming in. What were your next steps basically to answer that demand and make sure that you could continue to grow and not, of course, spending all of your time writing the articles yourself?
Oh, well, so, I know like Brett from Design Joy, he likes to do all the work himself, right? He's a kind of a complete polar opposite of me on the productized service spectrum. I prefer to do something once and never do it again. That's kind of one of my life goals. And so for me, as soon as I started to have like this influx of work, I track my time religiously. I have since I was a CTO. It's just a really helpful way to understand where I'm actually spending my hours, because time is the most limiting factor you have in your life. Money is always possible to get more. It's always possible to get more energy, to get more strength, but not time. You just only have so much. So protect it. Anyway, so I track my time and I would look at those timesheets and I'd be like, I always want to spend 50% of my time on sales and marketing, no matter what. So even when the client work comes in, I got to find a way to reserve that time for sales and marketing so we continue to grow. Then I'd take that 50% of the time I was spending on production and I'd look at what am I spending the most on? Writing, editing, account management, and kind of back and forth with clients. And so I start to look at like writing. That's obviously the next biggest bucket. That's taking me 8 hours a week or something like that. So I went off and started to find freelancers. I started with friends of mine who I had either hired or worked with in the past who were engineers who I knew could write fairly well. And then I kind of branched out over time and eventually found freelancers just randomly on the internet. And then editing too was a similar thing. Like I would track my time and I saw that editing was taking more and more time, and I hate editing. It's very detail oriented work. I'm not good at it. So I started to look for contract editors to help, and I went back to somebody who had edited my work in the past who was really good. I just brought her on part-time. So a lot of these early hires were network based, and it was just based on tracking my time and seeing where it goes. And then when the demand, like when the numbers didn't make sense anymore, I hired it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so for the structure of the team, is it mostly freelancers that are paid per article, or do you also have some core part-time or full-time staff? How is the team structured?
Yeah, that's right. So it's always been a version of this, and it's scaled up and down as needed. So we have a huge pool of software engineers who write. They're very fractional. They write 1 or 2 articles a month in general. There's a couple hundred of them at any given time. And then we have a smaller pool of contract writers and tech reviewers who are like half-time to full-time. So they're either doing this full-time or as part of a few freelancing gigs. And they do both the quality control on the engineering side to make sure that things we write are technically accurate and that the code runs. And then also the editorial side. So does the copy make sense to follow the outline? And then we have a even smaller, like 5 of us right now that are on the full-time core team that do sales, marketing, account management, and oversee the editorial management teams.
All right. And so one of the learnings I had, one of my experience working with freelancers back at Many Pixels, it really didn't work for us because we had some problem with finding reliable designers who could work every day and produce the assets every day. And so we decided to have full-time contractors, basically like 40 hours a week that would work for us. And we had about 30 to 35 of them any given point. So how did you overcome that? Did you have a specific criteria you would look for when hiring those freelancers, or was it mostly just working with them for a long time and then the relationship and the trust built itself over the months and years? Or how did you overcome this?
Yeah, like a lot of the people who are on our full-time team started off part-time, and then, as they showed that they were really interested in this and they were a good fit for us culturally and work-wise, that we would kind of raise their hours and eventually make them full-time. That happens a lot. I'll say with the way that our service works though, we need subject matter experts. So software engineers who have a huge array of knowledge, everything from like vector databases all the way up to front end and JavaScript and mobile app development and CI/CD, like just all these things. I knew a lot about tech, but I wouldn't know all the topics we covered today. So we have to have a really wide swath of writers. We couldn't do it with 5 full-time writers or something. It just wouldn't work. So unfortunately, that constraint is just there. You can't really do anything about that. So what we've done is kind of designed the service delivery to work around that limitation. So unlike with Many Pixels and a lot of the design services out there that I've seen, we can't do like daily turnarounds on things. If things take a lot longer to produce. But that said, the quality is very good, and the production value is very good, and the technical ability of these people is really good. So it's a trade-off, and our clients understand that. We just make that very clear when we go through the sales process.
Yeah, as long as you set expectations and that there are no surprises, that's the most important. Of course, it's been a really high growth, like from zero, a few $100K in revenue, and then to 1 million to 2.5 million. And when people hear a story, you also did an interview with Starter Story, they think, oh, everything was great and it went great, but it wasn't really the case, especially last year. So can you tell me a little bit about what happened last year?
Yeah. I mean, this is what's great about entrepreneurship is you start to meet other entrepreneurs and you hear their real stories, but the behind the scenes stories, right? And you realize that anybody who does this for more than a couple of years, or more than 5 or 10 years, is going to have these huge ups and huge downs. There's just no way around it. And so 2023 was was a tough year for me, both personally, professionally, and with both businesses that now I have too. So anyway, so what happened, like the kind of short of it, and I wrote a big blog post that you said really resonated to you, and I think a lot of people have told me this. In 2022, we had our second kid. That was great. But in 2022, simultaneously, Draft.dev started to really slow down. We had to cut a lot of staff and really start to look at the numbers because tech in general, as interest rates started to rise, tech started to get less investment. And it's just this macroeconomic thing that slowed us down a lot. There's just no way around it. I mean, these are VC funded companies. They're on a limited timeline. As they start to run out of runway, they have to cut budgets, and marketing is the kind of the easiest thing to start cutting because it's a long-term investment. So we started to get more and more like non-renewals and started to get pretty bad from that perspective. Fewer sales calls, started to cut down the sales team and the production team, both move people to part-time. And it was just mentally that is exhausting. We've been going through this period of like hire as fast as you can, get people on board as fast as you can. And then all of a sudden had to like hit the brakes and turn back the other way really fast. Now I'll admit that maybe I was not, maybe I should have been more conservative in my management style and hiring and all that. Like hindsight is what it is. But at the same time, you just don't know what the market's going to do. And so that was it was hugely painful because I lost a lot of good people who I would love to work with again and hope I do, but there's just no way we could keep all the staff we had. So that was tough mentally. And then simultaneously, I wasn't sleeping well because the second kid is, doesn't sleep as well as the first, plus the first is also having trouble adjusting to a little brother. And so it's just like this mix of things. And then to throw that like more onto myself, I'd gotten together with a partner and we had built out this idea for buying another company. And so we had just closed on buying the second company in April 2023. And so, one business not doing well, all of a sudden I have to take over running a second business. I'm jumping back into Draft.dev to do things, roll up my sleeves and run sales calls again, help with the engineering management, like things I'd been pulled out of, but now I had to jump back in and help because there just wasn't anybody left to do some of these things. So it was extremely mentally taxing. And it led me to realize I've learned a lot from it, I would say, that it definitely showed me some of my limitations and some lessons about running a business that I would kind of take to heart for the next time around. But also, coming out of it and looking back at it now, the biggest thing that I took away was the need to maintain balance no matter what and just keep perspective. The business isn't everything. Family is really important. And that, when you get your self-worth too wrapped up in the company and how well it's doing, or, if my personal pride is just all about how big Draft.dev is, it can really deflate you when it goes the other direction. And so I've really tried to separate to a whole nother level now. And I think it's going to make me better in the long run.
Yeah, that's a great learning, I think. And so, yeah, the thing that also made it more difficult is you buying the podcast consultant around that time, or like end of 2022, I guess, or like in early 2023. So can you tell me a little bit more about that process? Like first, what made you decide to acquire another business? Of course, I think Draft.dev was already working quite well. Of course, it was decreasing a little bit, but you already had a strong business with strong basis. So what made you first decide to choose to acquire that business? And then what was the process and your criteria to identify the right business to buy?
So like a lot of entrepreneurs, I love learning and I kind of have a short attention span. I love to get to the 80% of things. Like I'm not a person who masters any one subject. I never have been. I was always a very mediocre software engineer. Before that, I was a mediocre mechanical engineer. But I like to just learn things up to a point that other people find challenging, just so that I know what it's all about and have like enough of a language to speak about it. And so, as 3-4 years into Draft.dev, it's not that I'd learned everything about developer relations, developer marketing, or running an agency. By all means, I have not learned everything, but I felt like I've learned enough where I was ready to go test my knowledge, do it again, and then see how I can move up another layer. So what I did was I started to get together with a friend of mine who we've been talking for years about doing something together. And I said, like, what if we go buy another business and we run it together? And then what if we go buy 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 more businesses in the next few years? Would you be up to do something like that? And he was like, yeah, that sounds exciting. Let's go for it. And so that's what we're on the journey to do, Robin. We want to buy 10 companies in the next 10 years and get them to at least 100 million in total revenue. So how we'll do that, I don't know exactly. I have a lot of like the sort of next 2 or 3 years plotted out, but then it gets fuzzy and you kind of like got to figure out like as you get closer and closer what that's really going to look like. But having a big goal like that is extremely exciting because it means that I can come to work every day with a very specific purpose in mind. And it helps me a ton when it comes to evaluating what I should be and shouldn't be doing with my time. And then the other big thing about that is like the revenue number, the size of companies is very arbitrary. But what's not arbitrary is the learning that I will have to go through and my partner will have to go through to get there. Nobody buys 10 companies in 10 years without learning a shitload of lessons. And that's what I'm looking forward to most. So the first sort of step in that journey was, let's buy one company. Let's learn how to do it. So we looked into all the different options. We found that, we could qualify for SBA loans. That's a program here in the US that allows you to buy a small business essentially with very high leverage, which means very low cash down. And since I already had another business that was running pretty well and, spinning off cash, that we were able to use that. And my partner brought in, money as well to get this first business bought. And it was a great experience. I learned a ton about working with the bank, learned about working with the sellers and how to kind of maximize our impact as we look for the next one in the next year or two.
Yeah. So maybe, can you tell me a bit more about what was the criteria that you decided to look for the company that you would potentially acquire?
Yeah. Why buy the company? And then what was that process like? So for this first acquisition, we wanted to go with something relatively small in the terms of acquisitions. So I'll kind of give you guys, like anybody who's watching this and not familiar with how acquisitions work in service businesses, but very rarely do service, like digital service businesses, online service businesses, marketing companies get bought if they're under probably $3 million in revenue is a pretty good rough cutoff. Now there are obviously tons of exceptions, but I just mean like in general, it's very hard to justify buying an agency that's say under $1 million in revenue. And the reason for that is that typically the founder is still extremely involved in service delivery up until about that point. And so almost no one would want to buy that kind of company unless it's a direct competitor. Let's say it's just buying the client list, or maybe it's a partner buying another partner out or something like that. But rarely does somebody like a third party like us come in and buy something small. But what we figured was we are experienced business operators. My partner had started a startup before that got funding and sold to another company. I had just started Draft.dev and been through startups. So like we both felt very comfortable operating a small business, even if it was smaller than what normal people would buy. And by buying something smaller, we'd have the chance to like de-risk it a bit. There's very little that can, at the end of the day, the loan we take is relatively small. So we looked for something around $1 million in revenue was our kind of number we were looking for. And we were looking for it to have a pretty well-established team that could do most of the product delivery. And that's where, the productized service world is so good for this. Like it is possible to sell a productized service if the founder has been able to get out of the service delivery and ideally get out of sales, and it's doing around $1 million in revenue. I think that's a very viable business personally. Now, that said, there are some trade-offs for sure, and I could definitely talk about that. But so that's what we were looking for. We were looking for a very productized type company that had a great base of a wide range of clients. We didn't want to see a big high client concentration. We wanted to see kind of a niche within a sector or industry ideally. And we wanted podcasting because I think at the end of the day, the quick and easy way to say this is there's going to be more companies doing podcasts or video podcasts in 10 years than are doing them today. It's a pretty simple thesis, but that's really all you need when you're talking about a long 10-year horizon is something that you believe there's going to be more of or more demand for. And then there were a lot of fringe benefits to it as well. Like we knew that Draft.dev could use the video and podcast production and cross-sell those to its clients. And so there's like a way to already bring in more business just right on day one. So there's a lot of things there that we look for. We also wanted to see like a founder who we could trust, because at the end of the day, when you buy a company, you're getting into a pretty serious relationship with that founder who's selling, because they've got to do a lot of things right to hand it off to you. We got very fortunate there. The guy that sold us the company and moved on now, fantastic guy, would work with him again, trust him 100%, very, very genuine kind of person. And that's the kind of person you want to buy a company for, is the kind of person you go into business with, because you are essentially going to be locked with them for a while. So that's kind of the way that worked.
Yeah, that's amazing. And in terms of structuring the deal, I suppose you have to put a certain amount down and then you can get a loan and maybe do a seller note. So you don't need to go into the specifics, but how did you structure that deal to buy the company?
Yeah, it gets pretty technical pretty quickly. And I did write a blog post about acquiring the podcast consultant. So if you want to check that out, you can find all the numbers and technical details and all that stuff. I'm pretty open about it. But in the United States, you can use an SBA loan to finance the purchase of another small business that is in the US. Now, this is one of those things where I know, like, Robin, you've got international experience. Obviously, a lot of your listeners probably have international companies that operate outside of the US or are based out of the US. And one of the disadvantages to that is you can't sell to someone on this SBA loan. So you'll have to find other ways for them to finance it. So just something to keep in mind. But it allows you to do is put 10% down, and then you can finance up to 90% through an SBA backed loan, Small Business Administration backed loan. And so what that means is you can only, buy $1 million company and you can put down $100,000 to get it. And you're on a 10-year loan note for that's pegged to the interest rate, the Fed's interest rate. So it in some ways, it is a really good deal. On the flip side, though, you have to put down a personal guarantee and essentially guarantee the loan with all the assets you have. So my other business is essentially at stake for this loan. Now, I'm not too worried about it, given that we've been in there almost a year and it's gone really well and things doesn't seem like it's all going to fall apart. So I feel good about it. I always sleep over it now, but it is a little bit scary, right? You put, potentially your house and your car and everything else you own up when you do this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Karl. We'll wrap this up in a bit. Before we finish this interview, can you share any big learnings that you've had over the years, and where can we learn more about you?
My biggest one, Robin, is that belief that you could do something drives everything. Belief drives you to take bigger action, which drives you to get bigger results. And those bigger results show you that you can believe even bigger than you were before. So believe you can do something is the first step. And I know it's cheesy and a little woo-woo, but I think it's just the thing that comes back to me over and over again. As far as, I go into all these stories in a lot more depth on my blog at karllhughes.com. So I'm always happy to have people read that. Or if you ask me questions or send me DMs on social media, I'll probably send you off to some blog posts. And you're welcome to reach out, Karl at Draft.dev. I'm a pretty open guy, and I really appreciate the time. It's always fun to talk to other entrepreneurs that are out here building cool stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Karl, for joining today, and thank you.